Your inferior function also can have an impact on your attraction to other people. Mark Hunziker, who wrote the book Depth Typology, said we tend to be attracted to people who exhibit these inverse qualities and to form archetypally idealized ideas of them, and to then be disappointed and upset when they fail to live up to that ideal. Virtually every adult has experienced this attraction of opposites. So I was so excited when I read this because I saw this over and over and over again when I was profiling people, especially couples, where I'd see these opposites who are married and there was an immediate spark of attraction. And then down the road, they started having conflicts and problems and they felt let down by each other. For example, I often saw EFJ types with ITP types. So EFJs have inferior introverted thinking and ITPs have dominant introverted thinking. And again, I would see like ESFJs with INTPs. And I kept thinking, why is this happening? And then I would see INFJs with ESTPs. And it's because when you're with someone who has your inferior function as their dominant function, you tend to know that this is what you kind of feel like this is what I need to be balanced. This person will make up for my weaknesses in this area. And because your inferior function is your aspiring function, you project all of those aspirational qualities onto that person. If you're an INJ and your inferior extroverted sensing, you think of it as this, incredible superpower that you just can't quite master. You might see an ESP and think, wow, they are the superhero that I always wanted to be. And they might be thinking of you as well. So you definitely will see this attraction to the inferior function in relationships many, many times. I don't know what you think, Denzel. Have you seen this as well?
Yeah, I see it a lot. I see it a lot. It's very fascinating. I don't think this is what you're saying. I'm not sure. But I mean, well, wow, so many thoughts just came to my head. Let me condense it. I think that me and Susan both agree that any two types can get along and have a great and beautiful relationship because a lot of times it's more about health. But yeah, some types will probably have a more smoother relationship than other type pairings, simply because of these types of things. And yeah, that's usually like some of the cases, like because especially if your hero function like is your partner's inferior function, a lot of times you can be so confused as to like, because that's like the water that you swim in. So it's like, it's just so obvious to you. So many things are just so obvious to you. And you're like, how come you don't get this simple thing? And it's like, you won't even realize that, oh, wait, maybe I'm just good at this because, again, like it's my dominant function. Mainly people who are not aware of. But yet, yeah, like Susan said, like they're drawn to these people in this way because of that inferior aspiration. And it definitely causes a lot of interesting dynamics there. Eric Thor is here. Wow, that's dope.
Hi, Eric. Anyone who's watching, you need to go check out Eric Thor's video on YouTube. He's amazing. I could go on and on about that. He has a question. He says, it seems people with our inferior function are the easiest to misunderstand. Why is that? And how do you learn to see and understand this function better in others? That's a really good question. I feel like I could talk for an hour about that, especially because I am married to someone who has the dominant function as my inferior function. I think from my experience and also what I've read, we tend to look at our inferior function as being, wow, it'd be really cool to be good at that, but it's actually really not that important. And so because we go through our whole lives thinking that way, we don't develop it very well. We don't learn to respect it very well. And so a lot of times when we're interacting with other people who have that as dominant, we can develop the mindset that why are they focused on all these things that really aren't that big of a deal? So how this could look if you're an INJ with an ESP type is you think as an INJ, wow, my insights, my big picture visions are so important. Yes, it's good to enjoy the moment and be like present and blah, blah, blah. Like exactly like with like that kind of attitude, but it's really way more important to do the other thing. And then the ESP is like, we really need to be in the moment. We really need to be focused on what's real and what we can trust right now via our senses. Yeah, I guess it's important to like read between the lines and look for some deeper meaning, but overall, like, why does that really, overall, it makes way more sense to be realistic here. Like, let's be realistic here. And so you can find it easy to be maybe attracted to someone who's that opposite way from you. But what I've found a lot is that people are initially attracted and then they start getting to all kinds of fights later on. because they're both constantly devaluing the other person's natural process. And I feel really silly explaining type to Eric Thor because he probably knows like all of this already. But that's what I've seen, is that if you're with someone whose dominant function is your inferior function, you'll constantly have to stop yourself from devaluing and dismissing their perspective. It takes more conscious effort for you to realize that their perspective is just as valuable as your own, because you've spent your entire life dismissing it and thinking it's less important than your dominant function. And so you can get really condescending really easily, and they can get really condescending to you really easily. So yeah, I feel like as far as how do you learn to see and understand this function better in others, that's the first step, is just realizing that their perspective is just as valuable as yours, even if your brain doesn't rationally want to accept that sometimes. And then, trying to understand, learn about that function, experiment with it, learn about how it's been used in history in good ways, or think about your life without that function. So if you are an INJ, I know I'm talking a lot about INJs, but if you're an INJ, imagine a world without extroverted sensing and how terrible it would be. Imagine a world where everyone's, blind to facts, blind to reality, and just living in their, contemplative visions. Like, it would be a terrible world to exist in. So sometimes if I find myself really annoyed about a function or not valuing it, I find that once I picture the world without it, I realize just how important it really is. And so thank you for asking that question, Eric. Denzel, I know I just monologued about that. What are your thoughts on his question?
Yeah, no, I think that you did a really great job in answering that. And I think that it also goes right back to what I was just saying previously about it being the water that you swim in. Like, one example could be, I know an INTP. Me and him are cool, but he admit that like there's times where he gets frustrated with FJs because they might ask him to like explain certain things like a little bit more, and he gets frustrated because to him as a TI Dom, it's like, it's so simple. It's just this. But then when FJs, they have it as a tertiary or an inferior function. So for me as an inferior TI, then it's like, I like to ask questions, because for me, with that uncertainty, it's like, okay, even when I really know what I'm talking about, then it's like, it just takes a little bit to make me be like, do I really know what I'm talking about? Like, wait, I've been studying type for so long, but I don't know, maybe this person's like actually right. Whereas like a TI Dom, even when they're wrong, they can have all of the logic and everything like that, because it's just so, I don't want to say convoluted, but like so tight packed in a way. So with that being said, a TI Dom, because it's like so easy and fluid for them, then a lot of times, and it's not every TI Dom, but like I've seen it happen here and there. It's like, they're just like, how did you not understand this? Or like, you know what I mean? But we do this a lot with our dominant function in general. So like for me, as an FE Dom, I could also just be like, how is it not obvious to you that speaking in this tone is going to cause conflict? Or how is it not obvious to you that, like just common courtesy types of things, or just common like relational types of things? But I've talked to a lot of ITPs who it just really goes over the head and they get confused. They're like, I don't understand why this person thinks I'm an a-hole. And I'm like, well, where should we? But I've taken more on like a teacher role in that way. And I think that's what I do a lot on my YouTube channel. It's like, for years, I just, as an FE Dom, I just thought like, yeah, no, it's just simple. This is how you treat people and this is that. But then after like giving advice to a lot of people and observing a lot of things and saying things that I thought was very obvious and people are mind blown by it, then I'm like, maybe this is not as obvious as I thought. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, let me start talking about it on YouTube. Let me start writing blogs. Let me start coaching. And I'll coach people. And to me, once again, it's like very obvious stuff, but to them, it's monumental. And it's not because I'm a genius. It's because, oh, this is my superpower. And they have their own superpower. And it's like, okay, instead of like looking down on people, like, how do you not know this? It's like, oh, let me teach them. And let me hopefully you'll have a teacher spirit to teach me about what you're good at and everything. Like, I know a lot of FI Doms who are very great with like getting deep into like emotion and the human core and like value and stuff like that. And then there are some who get like very like, like, oh, how do you not know this? Like, how do you not feel that? Like, how do you not know how to process your feelings and this is that? But then there's other FI Doms who are like, oh, like they realize like, wow, I have a superpower for this. And so it's almost like it's my job or my duty or something that they can take on to help guide people in the world who can do that. Like it's like you steward that function because it's your dominant function. And also know that we all suck at our inferiors. So, you know, that kind of keeps you humble because it's like you can be so about this, but then you look at your inferior function and it's like, oh, actually, never mind. Can you help me with this instead? So that's kind of like how I tend to approach the world. Is like I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at and I know what I'm uncertain at. And I teach what I'm good at, but then anything that I'm not, I just want to learn and appreciate it. And so I think that that's a good way to be able to have that kind of understanding.
Thank you, Denzel. That was amazing and perfect. I think that one of the reasons it's so important to know about type is actually to help people with humility, because it is very easy to go through life and just think everyone's a bunch of idiots because they're not operating the way you do. And then all of a sudden, when you learn about type, you realize, oh, wait, we're all a bunch of idiots, sure, about certain things. But that person, now that I think about it, they understand this idea or this concept or this way of doing things so much better than I could ever dream of. And it can help us to have much more respect for people, but also have respect for ourselves and also a good dose of humility.